welcome everybody to another KAPcast, and we're very lucky to be joined here today by Peter Blanshard, who's the CEO of Institute of Automotive Mechanical Engineers. And Peter, welcome.
Thank you very much, Robbie.
Mate, familiar face. We've known each other for a fair few years now, and we're excited to talk to you about ethanol and biofuels. And you guys are the foremost authority on the application of that in automotive vehicles in Australia. I've often had people say, we talked to RACQ or you talk to someone else. You say, well, mate, that's not who you talk to about the performance or the impact on your vehicles. You want the blokes with the motors and engines in the laboratories and assessing that, and that's you guys, as I understand it.
Well, to a point, mate, we're certainly looking at the information that's provided. People are a lot smarter than ourselves that are building these engines today, and they're building it around sustainability. They're building it around E10. Now, if you look at some of the vehicles around Europe and also in America, they're now building them to be E20 compliant. In Australia, we're only at E10. We're not pumping out as much E10 as we could, and there's certain pockets of Australia that don't even get a look in. Rural Queensland and Victoria, two areas to mention.
Yeah, we've both got rural backgrounds, Peter, and we're interested for a number of reasons in biofuels. One of those is that it has the potential to really stimulate production and agriculture in Australia and just jobs in rural areas. There's a lot of myths and there's a lot of probably ignorance around the application of ethanol and biofuels, and you've been in a strong position to be able to look at the evidence and look how that plays out, and have a look at how it applies globally and how we compare to other countries in that same space. So whilst we see a lot of benefits in an economic area, you're a good person for us to talk to, who can educate us and provide some evidence of how that applies. Can you talk to us how far we are behind other countries?
Well, we're a long way behind. There's so many other countries that have already been down this journey for decades. Their motor vehicles are already there. Let's take one example, Brazil. I mean, we did dabble in vehicles here in eco biofuel cars that could take up to E85 fuel. And I've got to tell you, there's some of those in Brazil. The E85 is your base model, and E100, so 100% ethanol, is the fuel that powers them. We are a long way behind. When you look at the states in America like Minnesota, it's called the green state. Most of the vehicles sold there are of E85, and we're scratching our noggins over E10 and compatibility. A man or a woman that's a lot smarter than me has designed these things to run efficiently and have longevity behind them. You raise the point of your concern, and concern sits there of the real older car, the car where ethanol was not even considered. Those sorts of vehicles are not the prime user of ethanol. But in those older cars, that may not be your prime form of transport. We might be looking at somebody who's got a collector and whose car was never dreamed to run on ethanol-based fuels. Now, that's not our prime one. We want to look at the mums and dads' vehicles where we can save them money on their fuel, and we can put a fuel into that car that a trained engineer has built, metallurgy within the engine, the computer technology to get the best burn, the best idle, the best start, the best fuel economy out of the E10 product.
Well, tell me first, it's cars built before when? What sort of date do we work off when cars were mostly non-compliant?
We've been working off around 2020. There were certainly cars made prior to that they said they could burn E10, and they can, but there was fuel pump longevity, there were some O-ring problems, maybe the injection might not have been up to speed. It would burn it, and it would do a job. but it probably wasn't the best. Comparing it to a vehicle of today, which it's come in 2022, 2023, those cars are specifically designed. They're mapping in the computer, the metallurgy, their injectors, their pipes, their fuel pumps, their fuel tank. Everything is designed so that it can use 10% ethanol, and in some cases, cars that were destined for, say, California can actually now burn up to E20.
So what's the impact of that? So if you're pulling cars off the boat that are tuned for the E10 and E20, do they need adjustments then to come into Australia where we don't have that fuel available?
No, we don't. No, we don't. The computer has a series of maps inside it, and it will burn everything from the roughest 91 RON fuel all the way through to 98 or E100, as some oil companies have dabbled with. Most cars have the mapping to handle any of those fuels. But is it the sweet spot? Is it the optimum? And I think most of the mapping is based around that E10, 92 to 94 RON fuel is what they're based around. They seem to deliver good throttle response, excellent miles per gallon. That's what they're tested at. When you see that sticker on the window that says, what should we expect from emissions and also from a litres per 100 Ks, it's always based around that E10 fuel.
What's some reported problems with the E10 for, cars that aren't compliant?
Look, the biggest problem is the longevity of the componentry. Ethanol by nature, because it absorbs moisture, can erode certain forms of aluminium, and the ethanol might affect a seal or a pump. But the main problem when you have an older style car that's never run on ethanol, when you put it in, it's got this incredible ability to clean out the carbon, to absorb moisture, as I said, and to clean things out. So often when you get somebody who hasn't run an ethanol-based fuel and they suddenly tip it into the car, we have two things. We clean rubbish out of the fuel tank and around the fuel pump, and it often blocks the fuel filter. And number two, when it's injected in and it burns and it's burning with its moisture inside there, it acts like steam and it takes a lot of carbon out of the engine. So an engine that has not been used to running, an engine that's clagged up, an engine that's got carbon deposits, to run at E10 initially, straight off, it's like putting a cleaner through it. It's like putting Drano in your drains. And that's why we look at each car individually. But you go and buy a brand new car, you get a car that's a 2016 model Commodore, you get a brand new Mitsubishi, a brand new Toyota, brand new Honda, anything that's quite new, that's E10 compliant, as we said, put it in and you won't have a moment's worry. Our older cars, maybe our 2006 model cars that have never seen an ethanol-based fuel, you'd have to be careful. When you put it in there, it would have a cleansing nature, so you would take it a little bit easier. You might put a new fuel filter on there, drive the car, and in 3 months' time, put another fuel filter on there, because we'll be trapping all this muck that's been inside the fuel tank that we're gradually absorbing and taking out. So, done right, we can convert, but there are certain cars, high kilometres, quite old, that have never seen e-fuel. You know what? You'd probably let that slip off to pasture and wait till you buy yourself a brand new one, then start putting the good fuel in from there.
I mean, to put the political slant on that from my point of view, though, if the KAP is trying to stimulate agricultural activity in the regions and fuel security and cleaning up the airways and from car emissions, and if you're trying to achieve all those things, it's a lot less, it's a lot less impact than the changeover from leaded fuel to unleaded fuel, which was all done in the name of health many years ago. They're completely non-compliant.
I'm showing my age here, but I was a part of that era where people would be coming in to repair shops and saying, can you unbolt the catalytic converter, put a steel bar through it and rot it out? Because if I have a catalytic converter in my car, it's going to melt down. It's the same story that ethanol melts aluminium. You don't see all these big Buicks and Fords and that in America with this slurry running underneath the car and say, well, he's run ethanol, it's melted the aluminium. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, interesting. And are you able to talk with KAP was actually the bill's in my name in Queensland, the first mandate of 4%, but it hasn't been successful despite us getting the legislation through. In my view, there just hasn't been any commitment at all from the government. They've moved on to the next shiny bauble in renewables, and they left out a big step in biofuels. Can you comment on where you've seen some of the failures are, or where the government has failed to act?
Look, we wondered when we first brought it out, and there was an app that was available where people could put their rego plate in and they could see whether their car was compatible for E10 fuel. I think that was a massive game changer for a lot of people, because it wasn't hearing from anybody. It was a government site that was basically powered by information that was straight from their logbook that says that car was compatible. Then, as another side of that, they could look at what service stations were in that area that could save them between 2 and 4 cents a litre. And today, we really need that. We need that help. When you've got fuel the range of $1.75 to $2.15 a litre, if we could save that 2 cents, 4 cents a litre, that makes a big impact on a lot of people. And, I think that's one of the areas that we let go. We did convince a lot of people to buy E10, and a lot of service stations ploughed money in to do it. But as you said, it's never been policed. We asked for a certain mandate and a certain percentage of total fuel sold to contain ethanol. I don't think that's ever been measured properly, which then cuts back on the infrastructural build that some of the distilleries have had. I know there was a distillery halfway up Queensland that purchased 2 new tankers to take ethanol to the gate where it would be mixed with fuel. That comes at a cost to the business. If we hit the targets that were originally laid, consumers would be well advanced, our emissions would be better off, and the amount of spend would have been recouped by now if all we had done was met the volume and the concentration levels that was originally set with your good work and the government.
It's disappointing that it hasn't had that traction, and we'd since revealed in Parliament that not one fine had ever been issued to any of the suppliers. So it's consistent with the notion the government has never had the conviction to really roll that out and deliver on it. But we'll keep there, mate, and it's nice to always have that backup from your organisation that can just deliver the truth and the facts around it to dispel some of those myths.
And what I dislike, Robbie, is the people in your area, the rural people that haven't had the same opportunity those in southeast Queensland, that have the opportunity of looking at the vehicles they drive, looking where they can get cheaper fuel, saving some money and saving the environment. It's the EPA in Victoria have just spent an awful lot of money putting in sniffing stations, looking for air quality. I mean, you're sitting on top of the Great Barrier Reef there. You need this air quality. We need it to be right. Surely by taking out 10% of the high sulphur content regular unleaded fuel and putting in ethanol, getting the octane up from 91 to perhaps 92 or 94, the car's going to drive better, it's going to meet manufacturer's specifications, but what comes out of that tailpipe is going to be better for the environment. You also spoke about before about fuel security. Yes, if we're going to import X amount of raw fuel and we're going to mix 10% of that, surely we're going to have a better storage rate. Surely we're going to be able to keep more fuel here. I know other countries it's gazetted that they should really keep about 90 days. I know 2 major countries which are exceeding that 90 days. Australia doesn't even have 9 days fuel security.
You know, the other one for me too, Peter, is the Dolby United Petroleum's Dolby ethanol plant. That's on mothballs at the moment, which is just an absolute tragedy. Beautiful plant, up to 100 employees. But I reckon every kid in Australia and high school should be made to visit the Manildra plant at Nowra to see what we can do with biofuels and production, because there's hundreds, I forget the workforce, but it's 600-700, I think, workers that it employed. They're a massive plant, not just ethanol, but that's a big component of production, and that's what we can be doing all around Australia. And once again, having some manufacturing in regional areas that relate to sorghum, sugarcane, or grain growth, and stimulating farming in those areas.
Absolutely. You can extract ethanol from any plant-based material. What you say about Manildra, it's 100% true. They've won world awards for their sustainability. I mean, they capture everything. When they're cracking down from that flour, they're taking out gum that can be sold for sweets and lollies. They're taking out starch that can go into fabric care and those spray starches that you buy when you do the ironing. You can use the rough cut ethanol to make a can of Glen 20 or something like that without, sorry about using a brand name, but, they use ethanol as a base product. This is all things that we can split down from this. And I'm a massive fan of what Manildra has achieved, and there is no way that Dalby wasn't going to be far off its heels. I mean, we only just went through a period of time where I believe it was in South Australia, I had a report where farmers were ploughing oranges into the ground. And God's sake, why are we taking them out, putting them in, getting the CSIRO to build us a top enzyme, put it in there, crack ethanol from them? Why are they getting ploughed into the ground? Why are we utilising them? And why are we then getting better emissions out, getting better performance? Maybe even if the produce came down because we're using excess produce, maybe when that costs come back, maybe the consumer could get 6 cents a litre discount, 7 cents a litre. We knew that with the store dockets many, many years ago, that 4 cents a litre was a game changer in the fuel supply. Where would we sit today if we could save mum and dad 6, 7, 8 cents a litre? And if they're buying excess materials, grain stocks, feed stocks, oranges, that we're able to make our ethanol from it, the price would come down, and that means that delivered to the service station, it come down. The transport's still making money. The oil companies are making the money. The retailer is making his money, but mum and dad can save. And what it's also doing, it's stopping ploughing good quality produce back into the ground.
There's a trial plant there in Mackay in Queensland, one of the universities, where they trial, as you say, different enzymes and different products. They throw everything down into these tanks for the distillery, and it's pretty interesting what they can do there. And I think they call all that third generation technology. And it's just the world is your oyster then when you can
100%.
Get that capacity and economies of scale.
We've got this. We've got the saltbush. We've got the palms. We've got this. We've got bananas. We got what you want, sugarcane. There will be something excess in that vegetable line. There will be something excess somewhere in Australia. We then put it into our distilleries. We add the enzyme. We get out of it ethanol, and we then start to give those byproducts to the companies that need it. But the most important thing is that mums and dads get the opportunity to buy the right fuel that suits their car at the right price.
And I understand, I think if I recall correctly, the Dolby ethanol plant, because there's a food versus fuel debate, and I just think that gets completely, I think that's very hard to measure, but it's certainly not as cut and dry as people make out, because they'll say, well, if that sorghum crop could have been used to feed people, then it can't be used. But that's not entirely true, because I think the numbers were something like 70% of the protein was still extracted from the sorghum and delivered to cattle feedlots, which is essentially back into human beings for feed. But I think once you took the water component out, it really equaled 38% or something. But this point's still very valid, that it's not a straight line equation there. There's still a fair bit of that. Like you say, it's not just taking the entire crop. You're using a lot of the waste that otherwise is not used at all of
sprung wheat,
where it was being produced.
Sprung wheat, Robbie. One of the things that every farmer hates is getting the moisture on their wheat crop as it's coming off. If you've got sprung wheat and you can't sell your sprung wheat, let me tell you, it still makes perfectly good ethanol. The other thing that you say is correct, that when you look at Manildra, they take the wheat and the chaff that's created the stalk, they blend that up, and when they take their proteins out, there is a protein sold which goes to people to make protein powders that you and I consume, but there is a crude protein that is put back into the straw, and that then goes back to the feedlots as cheaper feed, high protein, high fibre, back to the feedlots in blocks all ready to go. I mean, it's win-win. We're taking a crop that we can't make flour out of and we can't consume, but we got to take it, we got to pay someone to cart it, we got to pay someone to store it, we got to pay someone to create ethanol, and then we got to take all these bits off and sell them to everyone else. Where is there a problem here?
What do you need to see what do you think we need to push this in Australia? You and I can agree about it, but how do we? Is it partly education of the public? And there's been a lot of misinformation peddled around ethanol use for years in cars. Is it about that education process, or driving some government, or a bit of both?
I think there's definitely a bit of both there. We saw the results when we ran E10, the good fuel in Queensland for the southeast corner. It was a massive success. We had educated over 700,000 people about whether their car can or can't use ethanol. It was a screaming. It won one of Australia's largest public education campaigns. People thirst for that knowledge because they want to do the right thing. They want to do the right thing by their car. They want to do the right thing performance-wise. They want to do the right thing by their wallet. They want to do the right thing by emissions and sustainability. People, if you told them all the positives of it and opened up that fuel flap that has a sticker on there that says E10 compliant, and that's put on there by an engineer that's a lot smarter than myself, that there is the answer. Somebody says, well, this car has been built specifically to run on this fuel. Doesn't state a particular oil. It doesn't talk about a particular tyre. It doesn't talk about adding window tint. But what it does say is that this car is manufactured to run on e-fuel, and I really believe that that's the best thing we can do.
Yeah, well, you know, in the KAP, we feel it's one of our strongest environmental policies, and I'd argue it's the most effective environmental policy of any political party in Australia is mandating E10 to reduce those tailpipe emissions, and because there's an argument it will cost us nothing, and can only stimulate industry in Australia and reduces those tailpipe emissions. That's why we love it, and it's so good to be able to talk to someone like yourself that provides that that rigor around what it means to your engine and the vehicles, and if people have concerns, the IAME should be your first port of call of what sort of impact you should expect to your vehicle.
Our guys are happy to field phone calls, Robbie, at all time. We support them. We were supporting the Queensland government. We still, New South Wales government, I hate to rub it into you up there in Queensland, but the New South Wales government has their E10 Fuel for Thought campaign, and they still support us every year and still make that information available to the members of New South Wales. The numbers are still there. We're seeing 7,000 people per month that often visit the site to recheck things, look for discounted fuels, etc. It's still there in New South Wales.
I mean, if you hate waste like me and you want an opportunity how we reduce, so there's such great opportunities that it opens up for us. Peter, you're the CEO of Institute of Automotive Mechanical Engineers, and it's been it's so refreshing for me to have someone who's from a farming background as well, that lives in a regional area, and it's such a big organisation, and I hope we can support you more from Queensland and turn that around and be more like the New South Wales government to get behind you. Mate, thanks very much for your time. I know we've impacted on your busy schedule there in New South Wales today, but always a pleasure chatting to you, mate, and thanks for filling us in, informing us today, and we'll do everything we can from KAP's point of view to push biofuels in this country, so that we can grow the industry.
Yeah, mate. Well, very happy to support anybody that's interested, anyone from a political nature. We're happy to support. We're an industry association. We're one of the peak bodies for the practitioners out there. And this is what we want, mate. We want people like yourself and from a federal KAP and a federal level to look at what's reasonable and what's best for Australia. And I see that sometimes that the fables and the old stories get in the way of the truth. And the truth is that ethanol is used around the world. It doesn't have too many negatives associated to it. And I think the sooner we can all get on board and support what you guys are doing, support the rural economy, and get these farmers, get the trucks, get the distilleries, get the stuff shipped in the gate terminals, get it mixed and sent out. I mean, we haven't even started to cover some of these things, such as service stations. People talk about the cleansing action. They're worried about service stations and putting in the ground old service stations which may have rust in the tank. You know what? That's a cost to the business. If that tank's rusted, I'd much prefer to find it today because we're going to put ethanol in it than to wait for that rust to exfoliate, a tiny little hole form, and leak raw fuel into our ground. We don't need it in our groundwater. We don't need it in the ground. If that site has a problem or a potential problem, then pay someone, create a job, pay someone to come and fix it. This is win-win. I know that there is money to be spent, but this is what it's about, mate. I'm very, very happy to support you, and I love what you guys are doing out there. So, mate, at any time or anyone that listens to this, you want to make contact with ourselves, more than happy to talk about it.
Thanks, Peter, mate. Pleasure as always, and we'll stay in touch.
Thanks, mate. Cheers, buddy. Bye-bye.